Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! Let me tell you about this one time I had a run-in with the most entitled person I've ever met. I'm a cop, female. The story, it's about a day I'll never forget. I was on patrol in a quiet neighborhood when a call came in about a suspected burglary. The owner of the house was away on vacation, but a neighbor had seen someone sneaking around. I reached the location within minutes, ready for anything. There she was, a woman in her mid-30s trying to force open a window at the back of the house. She didn't even notice me at first. Wearing a designer jacket and high heels, she looked more like she was going to a fashion show than committing a crime. "Excuse me, ma'am," I called out. "Can I ask you what you're doing?" She spun around, her face a mix of shock and annoyance. "Who are you to question me? Do you know who I am?" she snapped. "I'm Officer X, and you're taking a break into a house. I need to ask you to step away from the window and put your hands where I can see them," I said firmly, but she just scoffed. "Listen, officer, this is a misunderstanding. I know the owner, and I'm just here to pick up some things for her," she lied smoothly. "The owner is out of town," I countered. Her eyes darted around looking for an escape. Well, she asked me to. "Look, you have no right to detain me," she yelled, suddenly aggressive. I took a step forward. "Ma'am, I am going to need you to come with me to the station." And that's when she lost it. She lunged at me, knocking me off balance. I wasn't expecting that from someone in stilettos. I stumbled, and she took off running. The chase was on. I radioed for backup, but I was determined not to let her get away. She was surprisingly fast, but I was faster. We ran through the streets, her high heels clicking furiously. She even tried to hail a cab, but the driver must have seen the desperation in her eyes and drove off. As we ran, she kept shouting over her shoulder, "You can't catch me! I'm too important for this!" Finally, I was gaining on her. Just as I was about to grab her, she turned and, in a last-ditch effort, pushed a garbage bin towards me. I dodged it, but it slowed me down enough for her to gain some distance. She was running out of steam though, and I could tell she wasn't used to this kind of physical exertion. Panting and cursing, she made one final turn into an alley. I followed, cautious now, knowing this could be a trap. But there she was, cornered and looking like a caged animal. Her designer clothes were stained and her hair was a mess. "End of the line, ma'am," I said, catching my breath. "You'll regret this. My husband is a lawyer," she screamed. "It doesn't matter who your husband is. You broke the law," I replied, just as backup arrived. We arrested her, and it turned out she had a history of theft and entitlement. She thought she could get away with anything because of her status. In 1968-69, at the height of the Vietnam War, my stepdad was stationed at Treasure Island in San Francisco, California. He was in the Navy, and to get this detail out of the way quickly, he did not go to Vietnam. What he did do, I only heard secondhand through my mother as he passed away in 2003 when I was 18. So this won't be a very detailed retelling. However, the bullet points I do have are still a pretty meaty pro-revenge story. From here on out, SD will be stepfather, and FF will be F-Phase, who's a recipient of my stepdad's wrath. Anyways, onto the story. When my stepdad was transferred to Treasure Island, he quickly found out a horrible truth. A group of people, a part of the military who FF was a part of, were befriending Green Guild recruits soon headed to Vietnam, getting them drunk, shooting them up with heroin, and taking compromising photographs of them while they were not enough to use to coerce them into being drug mules. How my stepdad found out and managed to not get mixed up in it, I don't have the details, unfortunately. All that I do know is that when he did find out, he of course went through the proper/usual channels of reporting it. But as far as I could gather from their retelling, nothing was ever done about it, obviously. They clearly felt like they had bigger things to deal with, so my stepdad, being the sort of character who hates to see the scales of justice so horribly toppled over, made it a point to follow these men around and try to intervene when he could if they tried to screw with anyone. I actually met one of the men he had helped and subsequently got his butt kicked for after my stepdad passed. So despite the vigilante/superhero undertones making the story seem almost too fantastic to be real. After meeting the guy, I was certain the old man wasn't pulling my leg from the grave. Anyways, as FF was extremely annoyed by my stepdad's interventions, he was constantly trying to push his buttons at appropriate times in hopes my stepdad would get in trouble and eventually court-martialed. It didn't work, fortunately. Although it wasn't hard to get my stepdad going at that time in his life. He was kinda full of piss and vinegar and drank a lot. At this point in the story, timelines kind of get blurred for me, but important factors are this. One thing my stepdad always had on him, no matter where he went, was a camera, which I now have and is one of my most cherished objects. Eventually, he got photographic evidence of what FF and his cronies were doing. What they depicted and just how damning they were, I have no idea. But it was enough that my stepdad felt confident they would take him down. On top of that, he had also been taking meticulous notes on what's, where's, and when's of FF's movement over what I'm thinking is a couple of years. But my stepdad did not provide the evidence right away. Super not clear on the details why, but around the time when he had compiled all of this evidence, I'm pretty sure my stepdad had been in the Navy for close to 10 years. He had moved up a couple of levels from where people in the Navy start. Sorry, my knowledge of the Navy/military is pedestrian at best. One day, he's in need of some help moving his girlfriend's things from her apartment to his place on base, so he either recruits the use of military personnel below him to help, or uses a military vehicle. Not super sure on that, but the point is that he used his position to help move his girlfriend on base, and most of the people who knew genuinely couldn't care less. But FF found out, and FF smiled grimly, I am sure, and saw his opportunity. He snitched, and my stepdad was court-martialed and demoted 2 levels for the misuse of military personnel or something or other, and thus blossomed a rage so deep in my stepdad it could be the kin of an earthquake far beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean. A threat so menacing you wouldn't know it at face value until it's too late and the rest of the tsunami is crashing down on you. And so my stepdad waited, spent his years getting back his previous rank and beyond, although he was often met with opposition as he tried to get to the much higher ranks because FF was often at the ear of at least one of the approving people who hand out ranks in the Navy. God, I'm so sorry to anyone in the Navy reading this. It actually got so bad that other people started to wonder what was keeping my stepdad back from getting any higher. To give a little context, but my stepdad still waited, continuing to keep tabs on FF meticulously, as FF climbed the ranks higher and higher and higher still. Stepdad's Navy career get to the absolutely zenith of his dreams, goals, and achievements to taste the glory of the sun at the top of the mountain. Stepdad's Navy career get to the absolutely zenith of his dreams, goals, and achievements to taste the glory of the sun at the top of the mountain, so he could then rip it all away from him in one fell swoop. Stepdad brought out every bit of evidence against him. FF was court-martialed, dishonorably discharged, and sent to prison. A year later, my stepdad was made Master Chief Petty Officer, as there was finally no FF sabotaging him, and spent the rest of his Navy career as such, retiring after 30 years and some time around the early 90s. He was a pretty laid-back individual by the time my mom and I came into his life, was honestly just an old pothead who loved cooking Chinese food, leaving the news on all day and playing various kinds of flight simulators on his computer. But my mom said when he told her this story, she could see how much it still royally pissed him off, and it was well over 10 years since he brought FF down. He laughed after she said, "It's been so long, you should let it go. You'll feel better," reassured her that he was, and that it was just when he told the story that he got angry about it again. That kind of anger comes back so easily when you start to go over the details again, like an old friend you'll never forget, but you don't always visit when you're back in town. Miss you, old man. So we all know that sometimes revenge is a dish best served cold, and this story is an old family legend. My grandmother was a pro at the long game, and this one was one of her best acts. Back in the 70s, there was a little pizza shop around the corner from their house that she discovered was selling beer to my 15-year-old uncle. She marched right into the store during the busiest time on a Saturday night and yelled at the owner that this crap needed to stop now. The idiot waved her off and said it was his business and he could do whatever he wanted. He practically shoved her out of the front door and told her not to come back. My grandmother told him if he ever sold beer to my uncle again, it would be the end of his days in that neighborhood. Remember, this was the 70s. The police weren't really enforcing liquor laws as stringent as they are now, especially when it came to corner pizza shops and one woman's allegations that their 15-year-old son was getting beer illegally. Fast forward about 1 month, and what does my grandmother find under my uncle's bed? Beer. She knows where he got it. She confronts him, and just like before, he says the pizza guy has been selling it to him and all the neighborhood kids. My grandmother asks some other mothers if they have found their kids with beer, and sure enough, yep, it's a thing. Now you might be thinking, so what? A couple of teenagers with beer, big deal. We all did that, except this guy was making a killing selling beer to the neighborhood kids. According to my uncle, he was selling to kids as young as 8. This he confirmed for me when he was an adult, and even sold it to them out the back door after hours, which is really illegal since it breaks major liquor laws to do that. My grandfather then went to the cops and they played the "we will take a report and look into it" type of stance with him. Not to fear, my grandmother was going to make good on her threat. I should probably mention that this whole thing went down in August. My grandmother threatened my uncle with life imprisonment if he ever bought beer there again and to completely stay out of that shop because bad things were going to happen. August comes and goes, and so does September, October, November, and the entire winter and spring. Like I said, my grandmother liked to play the long game. So July rolls around and completely out of the blue, a municipal snowplow rolls down the street at midnight and right into the front of this guy's shop, backing up and smashing into it again, and once more for good measure. It then pulls back and rolls down the street like nothing happened, never to be seen again. The whole thing was witnessed by a couple of neighbors sitting on their front steps trying to beat the heat that night. They called the cops and no one could believe what they were looking at and that there was a snowplow out in July. Clearly, someone was mistaken. The mothers of the neighborhood knew there was no mistake. They knew what went down, and it was a silent secret among them. No one spoke of it, no one acknowledged it, and no one cared. My family knew the real story. My grandmother knew someone who needed money, so she paid him to help. The guy had a buddy who had access to the snowplows for the county, and the rest was history. Even with all the money the pizza shop guy made selling beer to minors, he didn't have adequate business insurance to rebuild. Within days, he was closed for good. I am 44 male and I've been married to my wife, 41 female, for 4 years together for 7 total. I have 3 kids from my previous marriage, 21 female, 18 female, and 16 male. She has 2 kids from her previous marriage, 17 female and 13 male. The youngest 4 children all live at home with us. We live in a pretty small town on a large plot of land that I inherited as a teenager. I'm a partial owner of a large construction company that my great uncle started, so we're pretty well off. I have always made it a point to support my kids' dreams and hobbies because financially I am able to. My oldest does competition cheer and gymnastics, which helped her get a D1 scholarship. My second daughter plays basketball, softball, and soccer and also got a D1 scholarship. My son does motocross and he's pretty damn good at it. My son, 16, has been into motocross racing since he was probably 5 or 6. Over the years, we've bought more or less Tim bikes specifically for his racing. We still have 5 bikes that are very well maintained and work with no issues. Now that he's older, my son makes money from his races, and I also pitch in to buy his bikes or parts, but he usually pays about 70% of the costs for his bikes and parts. We recently bought a new bike that was close to $6,000 with parts and upgrades that my son paid $5,000 of. It's a very nice bike and my son loves it, which makes me happy. My stepson, 13, plays soccer and baseball, which he's in leagues for both. He never showed any real interest in racing, but he does like to ride, which he uses one of the old bikes for. We go for rides through the woods here and there, but he mainly stays on the property. We have a small racing course on our land that he likes to use, but he hasn't shown any interest in racing. There was never any issue with him using the older bikes until after we got my son his newest bike. My son has his first race with his new bike this weekend, and we were talking about it at dinner on Sunday, and my stepson became visibly agitated. My wife asked him what was wrong, and he said it was unfair that my son got a brand new bike and he has to keep using the old ones. He asked me why he couldn't get a new bike, and I told him that he never showed me he cared about racing. I also told him that my son paid for most of the bike himself, which is why he was able to get the bike in the first place. My wife didn't like my answer, and neither did my stepson. I've stood firm on this decision, but my wife is still pressuring the issue and feels like I'm mistreating my stepson. I can afford to buy him a new bike, and I'm not intentionally excluding my stepson, but I'm also not going to spend thousands of dollars on something that is essentially a toy for him. Am I the jerk for this? Someone saying, you're not the jerk. Fair does not mean equal. It doesn't matter if you can afford to buy him a $6,000 bike. He rides for fun, not competitively. It would be wasteful to buy him an expensive bike because he's jealous. Your wife is ridiculous, and shame on her for entertaining this unnecessary drama. Your son paid $5,000 of his own money for his bike. Why should you just hand your stepson $6,000? If they want to squawk about fairness, tell your wife when she or stepson comes up with $5,000, you will give him $1,000, the same as you did with your son. That's fair. I bet they will shut up real fast. Or whine that he can't earn $5,000 like your son. The response should be exactly, he can't earn the money, so he doesn't need a bike. Another commenter adds, not the jerk. Offer him the same financial assistance you gave your son for the newest bike. Tell him you will gladly pay for 30% if he pays the other 70% upfront. I guarantee he doesn't want a new bike that bad. And your wife is a jerk for thinking you're mistreating her son by not spending thousands of dollars on a bike for a hobby he isn't even into. She wants you to throw thousands of dollars away just to prove that he's somehow equal. At the same time, let's be real, he isn't your own child. Why can't she buy him the bike? Why can't his own daddy buy him the bike? I'll probably get downvoted for this. But in a blended family, fair isn't always equal. You have your kids, and they are financially your responsibility. While it's your wife's financial responsibility for taking care of her son, you're already providing him a roof over his head, among many other things, I'm sure. I think this one's on mom. She should buy him the bike, or his dad should buy him the bike. You are likely correct that it will collect dust, so why should you throw your money out the window? Offer the 30% even though it sucks to waste that money. It's about the principle. If that isn't good enough for your wife, please take a good look at your marriage. Does she exhibit any gold digger behaviors? Is she a mooch or a leech? Does she expect you to financially support her and her child? Because her reaction throws up some huge red flags. Huge.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.